What if one river system quietly moves more grain than most countries produce in an entire year? What if that same waterway connects landlocked farms in the center of a continent to global markets thousands of miles away? And what if disruptions to that single geographic feature could trigger food price increases across multiple continents? There's a river system in North America that does exactly this, and understanding how it works reveals something fundamental about how geography translates into economic power. This isn't about politics or policy debates. This is about land, water, infrastructure, and the invisible systems that connect Midwestern farmland to breakfast tables in Egypt, Japan, and dozens of other countries. So let's examine how a natural geographic feature became one of the most strategically important economic corridors in the world, and why millions of people who've never seen this river depend on it functioning every single day. Before we break down how this river system actually works as an economic machine, why its geographic position creates advantages that no amount of infrastructure spending could replicate elsewhere, and what happens to global food supplies when water levels drop or infrastructure fails along this corridor, I want to explain what this channel does. We focus on geographic analysis, not political commentary. Our goal is to show how physical location, natural resources, and infrastructure systems create economic power that shapes daily life for people across the United States and around the world. We don't tell you what to think about policies or politicians. We show you how rivers move commerce, how ports amplify regional advantages, how transportation networks convert geographic position into economic output, and why understanding these systems matters for making sense of global supply chains. If you want clear explanations of how American geography creates economic influence, consider subscribing to the channel. We bring geographic and infrastructure analysis regularly, breaking down complex systems into understandable components. Just hit the subscribe button below. And if understanding how geography shapes power interests you, drop a comment with questions about any system we discuss. All right, let's examine this river system. So where exactly is this waterway located? And why does its position matter so much for understanding U.S. economic power? The Mississippi River system sits in the geographic center of North America, draining water from 31 U.S. states and 2 Canadian provinces. That's 40% of the continental United States feeding into a single river system. But location alone doesn't explain economic importance. What makes this geography so powerful? The river runs north to south through the continent's interior, connecting areas hundreds of miles from any ocean directly to deep-water ports on the Gulf of Mexico. That geographic arrangement, interior farmland connected by navigable waterway to ocean ports, creates something that most countries simply don't have: a natural transportation system that moves bulk commodities cheaply across vast distances. Why does moving goods by water matter so much economically? What's the advantage over other forms of transportation? Water transportation is the most cost-effective way to move bulk commodities like grain, coal, petroleum, and chemicals over long distances. A single barge on the Mississippi can carry as much cargo as 70 trucks or 15 rail cars. That efficiency translates directly into economic advantage. Farmers in Iowa or Illinois can get their corn and soybeans to export terminals on the Gulf Coast at a fraction of what it would cost to truck that grain to ports. That lower transportation cost makes U.S. agricultural products more competitive in global markets. It means American grain can be sold profitably in countries halfway around the world because the geography and infrastructure system keeps shipping costs manageable. But how does the infrastructure built along this river amplify the natural geographic advantage? Rivers exist in many countries, so what makes this system particularly powerful? The Mississippi River system isn't just a natural waterway. It's been systematically engineered over decades with locks, dams, dredging operations, and port facilities that maximize its cargo-moving capacity. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers maintains a 9-foot-deep navigation channel along the river's main stem. Locks allow barges to navigate past natural elevation changes. Dredging keeps channels deep enough for loaded vessels. And all along the river system, particularly at strategic points where tributaries meet the main channel, infrastructure has been built to load, unload, transfer, and store cargo. This combination of natural geography and engineered infrastructure is what creates the economic power. Let's look at the numbers to understand the scale. How much economic activity actually depends on this river system? According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture and Transportation Logistics reports, the Mississippi River system moves approximately 500 million tons of cargo annually. About 60% of U.S. grain exports move down this river system to Gulf Coast ports. That includes corn and soybeans that feed livestock around the world and supply food production chains in dozens of countries. The river also moves substantial amounts of petroleum products, chemicals, coal, steel, and manufactured goods. The economic value of cargo moving on this system annually exceeds $100 billion, and that's just the cargo value. It doesn't account for the economic activity dependent on that cargo reaching its destination. So what happens when this system doesn't work properly? What do disruptions reveal about how dependent various economic sectors are on this geography? In recent years, several events have demonstrated this dependence. When drought conditions lower river water levels, barge traffic gets restricted because vessels can't carry full loads in shallow water. That forces shippers to move cargo in more trips, increasing costs. When locks need maintenance or breakdown, backups of hundreds of barges can occur, delaying grain shipments to export terminals. During these disruptions, grain prices at Midwest farms drop because the transportation bottleneck reduces demand, while prices at export terminals rise because supply is constrained. These price swings ripple through global agricultural markets because so much of the world's traded grain moves through this single system. Why do global markets care about water levels in a North American river? How does local infrastructure impact international food supplies? This connects to a broader geographic reality. The United States produces massive agricultural surpluses that get exported worldwide. Countries throughout Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America import U.S. grain. Those imports depend on the Mississippi River system functioning effectively to get grain from interior farmland to ocean-going vessels. When the system is disrupted, it doesn't just affect American farmers. It affects global food availability and pricing. A drought in the Mississippi River basin or an infrastructure failure at a critical lock can influence what people pay for bread in Egypt or livestock feed costs in Japan. That's how local geography connects to global economic systems. Let's examine the specific infrastructure nodes that make this system work. Where are the critical points that amplify this river's economic importance? At the southern end of the system, just before the river reaches the Gulf of Mexico, there's a concentration of port facilities and export terminals. The ports of South Louisiana, Greater Baton Rouge, and New Orleans form a massive complex that transfers cargo from river barges to ocean-going ships. These ports consistently rank among the highest tonnage ports in the United States and globally. Why? Because they're positioned at the intersection of river transportation from the continental interior and maritime shipping to global destinations. That geographic and infrastructural convergence is what creates their economic power. Grain elevators store millions of bushels. Loading facilities transfer grain from barges to ships. Tank farms handle petroleum products. Chemical plants along the river produce materials that get shipped worldwide. All of this exists here because the geography makes it logical and economically efficient. What about the northern parts of the system? How does geography shape economic activity there? The Mississippi connects to other major rivers, the Missouri, the Ohio, the Illinois, creating an integrated system that reaches different regions of the continental interior. Along these tributaries, different economic activities cluster based on local resources and infrastructure. The Ohio River region moves substantial coal from Appalachian mines. The Illinois River connects to Chicago and the Great Lakes system through canals, creating a water route between the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. The Missouri River reaches into agricultural regions of the Great Plains. Each tributary adds to the system's total economic throughput, but they all depend on the main stem Mississippi to reach ocean ports. That's the geographic reality that creates power. One river system integrating the economic output of a vast interior region and connecting it to global markets. How does this compare to other countries' geographic situations? What advantages does this system provide that other nations lack? Most major agricultural producers worldwide don't have comparable natural transportation infrastructure. Russia and Ukraine have rivers, but they flow to seas with more limited access to global shipping lanes. Brazil's interior agricultural regions are farther from navigable waterways, requiring long truck routes to ports. China's major rivers run east-west, not connecting interior agriculture to southern ports efficiently. Canada's rivers largely flow north to the Arctic or Hudson Bay, not to major shipping lanes. The United States, through historical and geographic accident, has a north-south river system perfectly positioned to connect interior agriculture to Gulf Coast ports, with direct access to Atlantic and Pacific shipping routes via the Panama Canal. That geographic advantage, amplified by infrastructure investment, creates economic power that competitors struggle to match. But what vulnerabilities exist in this system? What happens if critical infrastructure fails or climate patterns change? This is where geographic analysis reveals system dependencies. The locks along the Mississippi and its tributaries were mostly built decades ago and require ongoing maintenance. When locks fail, the entire system backs up because there's no alternate route or river traffic past those points. Drought conditions, which climate data suggests may become more frequent, reduce navigable depths and cargo capacity. Flooding can damage infrastructure and disrupt operations, and the system depends on the Gulf Coast port complex remaining functional. Hurricane damage to those facilities can disrupt exports for extended periods. These vulnerabilities matter because so much economic activity depends on the system working reliably. Let's consider the employment and economic activity generated by this system. How many people's livelihoods depend on this river functioning? This is harder to quantify precisely, but we can examine different sectors. Barge operators, tugboat crews, lock operators, port workers, grain elevator employees, terminal operators, ship crews, longshoremen. These are the directly employed workers who move cargo on and around the river system. Then there are the indirect employment effects. Farmers whose crops move on the river, truckers who deliver to and from river terminals, equipment manufacturers who sell to barge companies, maintenance workers who service vessels and infrastructure, financial services handling cargo insurance and shipping contracts. Economic analysis suggests hundreds of thousands of jobs across multiple states depend directly or indirectly on the Mississippi River system functioning effectively. Why should people who don't live near this river care about it? How does this system affect daily life for Americans in regions far from the Mississippi? This connects to how integrated economic systems work. The efficiency of moving grain down the Mississippi affects U.S. agricultural commodity prices, which influence food costs nationwide. The river moves petroleum products that supply refineries and distribution systems across multiple regions. It transports chemicals used in manufacturing throughout the country. When the system is disrupted and transportation costs increase, those costs eventually show up in prices consumers pay for food, fuel, and manufactured goods. So even if you've never seen the Mississippi River, the system's efficiency affects your economic reality because modern economies are interconnected through supply chains that depend on infrastructure like this functioning reliably. What about the environmental dimension? How does this massive transportation system interact with natural ecosystems? This is a complex issue where economic benefits and environmental costs intersect. The river system has been heavily engineered, straightened in some sections, constrained by levees, controlled by dams and locks. This engineering increases navigation reliability, but alters natural flood cycles and wildlife habitats. Dredging keeps channels deep but affects river bottom ecosystems. Agricultural runoff from the vast drainage basin concentrates in the river and flows to the Gulf, contributing to water quality challenges, including the Gulf of Mexico dead zone, where oxygen levels drop too low to support marine life. These environmental effects are consequences of the economic activity the river supports. Understanding that relationship, how geography enables economic power, but that economic activity creates environmental impacts, is part of comprehending the full system. How does infrastructure investment in this system compare to other national priorities? What does maintaining this geographic advantage cost? The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers' annual budget for maintaining the Mississippi River navigation system runs into hundreds of millions of dollars. That covers dredging, lock maintenance, channel markers, and various other operations needed to keep the system functional. Additional funds go to port infrastructure, some federally funded, and some through state and local sources. Compared to highway or airport infrastructure spending, river system maintenance is actually relatively modest, but it's essential for the economic functions we've discussed. The geographic advantage only remains an advantage if the infrastructure is maintained. Deferred maintenance on locks and navigation infrastructure eventually creates bottlenecks that reduce the system's efficiency and economic value. Let's zoom out to the global perspective. Why does this single river system matter for international trade and food security? The United States is one of the world's largest agricultural exporters, particularly for corn, soybeans, and wheat. Countries around the world depend on imported grain to feed their populations and livestock industries. The Mississippi River system is the primary corridor for getting U.S. grain to export terminals where it can be loaded onto ships bound for Asia, Africa, the Middle East, and other regions. That means this river system, positioned in the middle of North America, is actually a critical link in global food supply chains. When the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization analyzes global food security, the functioning of the Mississippi River system is a relevant factor because disruptions here can affect grain availability and pricing globally. That's how local geography connects to international systems. What lessons does this system teach about the relationship between geography and power? Several things become clear when we examine how this works. First, natural geographic features create advantages that are difficult to replicate through policy or investment alone. You can't create a river system connecting interior regions to ocean ports if the geography doesn't support it. Second, infrastructure that amplifies natural advantages is essential. The raw geography alone isn't enough. The locks, ports, and dredging that make the system reliable and efficient are what convert geographic position into economic power. Third, systems that work invisibly and reliably become dependencies that affect millions of people. Most Americans probably don't think about the Mississippi River system when they buy food or fill gas tanks, but the system's efficiency affects prices and availability. Fourth, geographic advantages can also become vulnerabilities if systems are disrupted or if infrastructure isn't maintained. And fifth, local systems can have global implications when they're part of integrated international supply chains. So the real question isn't just why this river system is economically powerful. The question is how many people realize that their daily economic reality, food costs, product availability, employment in various sectors, depends on this single geographic feature and the infrastructure built around it, continuing to function reliably. How many understand that water levels in a North American river can influence grain prices in countries thousands of miles away? How many recognize that the geographic advantage the United States enjoys from this system is something other? Countries simply can't replicate regardless of how much they invest in transportation infrastructure? That's what geographic analysis reveals. The ways that land, water, location, and infrastructure quietly create economic power that shapes outcomes for millions of people who may never think about the systems they depend on. If you want to understand how geography shapes economic power in the United States, how infrastructure amplifies natural advantages, and how systems that most people never think about affect daily life, consider subscribing for ongoing geographic and infrastructure analysis. We examine real systems to explain how location and logistics translate into economic influence, without political framing or ideological arguments. Just straightforward explanations of how American geography creates advantages that ripple through national and global economies. Keep exploring these systems because understanding how the physical world shapes economic reality is essential for making sense of interconnected modern economies.